Call a cab, we're busy. My own mother said that to me while I was sitting at her table, 8.5 months pregnant, telling her my body was giving me signs I couldn't ignore. She said it the way you tell someone to grab their own umbrella, like I was a small inconvenience she had already mentally moved past. This is that night, and everything that came after it. My name is Elena, I was 25, and my husband Marcus had been away since Monday for a work conference he couldn't get out of. Mom had called twice that week saying a home-cooked meal would do me good. I didn't want to go. But I went because that's what I always did. I had been twisting the hair tie on my left wrist the whole drive over when that low, tightening feeling started moving through me and didn't stop. My mother, Donna, was serving green bean casserole, the same one every Sunday without fail. My father, Richard, was mid-sentence about the neighbor's fence. I pressed my hand flat on the table as a sharp contraction moved through me and I heard myself say, I think I'm going into labor right now. Mom didn't put the spoon down. She said, you've been saying this for weeks. Your body is adjusting, that's all. First-time mothers always think something is wrong. Dad said, do you want some water? Drink some water. Mom said, Richard, she's fine. Sit down and eat something. You drove all the way here. The dining room light flickered when the AC kicked on. Nobody moved. I thought about the notebook sitting on my kitchen counter at home. There was a knock at the front door right after Dad said what he said, and I remember thinking, good, because I didn't know what my face was doing anymore. My neighbor, Bev, a 68-year-old woman who has lived next door to my parents since before I was born, was standing on the porch with a casserole dish she was returning. She took one look at me gripping the doorframe and said, honey, are you okay? I said, I think it's time. She didn't ask my parents anything. She didn't wait for permission. She just said, my keys are in my pocket. Let's go, Mom called from the dining room. Bev, honestly, she gets like this. She's been anxious the whole pregnancy. Her doctor said it's completely normal first-time nerves. She has her phone, she knows the number. Bev looked back toward that voice for exactly 1 second. Then she put her hand on my back and walked me to her car. My chest tightened before I could name what I was feeling. In the car I said nothing. Bev said nothing either. She just drove. That was enough. My daughter was born at 2:17 in the morning. Bev sat in the waiting room the whole time. I found out later she called Marcus from my phone while I was being taken back because I hadn't thought to do it myself. He was 4 hours away and he drove back without stopping once. He walked into that room still in his jacket, saw me holding her, and just stopped in the doorway. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and put his forehead against mine and said, I'm sorry I wasn't here. I said, you're here now. She was so small. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, and she had his nose already. I looked at my phone 3 times that night. Every time I unlocked the screen, I thought about that dining room, that casserole dish, that 1-second glance. I put my phone face down on the bedside table. My parents didn't need to be in this room. My daughter was already here. We came home on a Tuesday. Marcus carried her in the car seat, and I carried the bag, and neither of us said anything about my parents until that night, after she was asleep. I got the notebook from the kitchen counter, the one I'd been keeping since March, 7 months of small things written down in blue pen on lined paper. I sat next to him on the couch and put it in his hands without saying a word. He opened it. I watched his face. He is not a man who shows a lot. Marcus keeps things steady, keeps things quiet, but I saw something move across his expression on the 3rd page, and he didn't look up again until he'd read every single entry. Then he closed it, set it on his knee, said, how long did you know it was this bad? I said, I don't know. I think I kept telling myself each thing was small. He nodded slowly. He didn't say anything about my parents by name. He just asked, what do you want to do? My hands went cold. Nobody had ever asked me that before. She called on a Thursday. 11 days after my daughter was born, my mother called like she was checking in after a long weekend. Her voice was warm, measured, the kind of warm that has always made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. She said, we've been giving you space because we knew you needed it. That's what good parents do. I didn't say anything. She kept going, and honestly, we were a little hurt. We didn't hear from you for 11 days and not one call. I held the phone very still. Then, I understand you were frightened. Labor is scary, especially the first time. We didn't want to add to your panic. She was rewriting it, right there, out loud in real time. I said, Mom, you told me to call a cab. There was a pause. Then she said, I think you remember it differently than it happened, honey. You were scared. That's okay. That's allowed. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Marcus was standing in the doorway holding our daughter. He watched my face. He already knew. If you've ever had someone rewrite your memory out loud, you know exactly why I need you to stay for what comes next. She showed up on a Saturday, no warning, just a knock. My Aunt Roberta, my mother's older sister, was standing at my door with a small gift bag and an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not sad exactly, more like decided. I let her in. She held my daughter for a few minutes without saying much, just looking at her the way older women do, like they are measuring something private. Then she set her down gently in the bassinet and sat across from me at the kitchen table. She folded her hands. She said, "I was at your parents' house the Sunday after you had her. Your mother told me the whole story." I waited. Aunt Roberta looked at me steady and said, "She told me you panicked, that you overreacted. That Bev happened to be there and offered." I felt the hair tie on my wrist without reaching for it. Aunt Roberta said, "Is that what happened?" I said, "No." She nodded once, slowly. Like she already knew the answer and was giving me permission to say it out loud. She wasn't asking for information. She was telling me I wasn't alone in what I'd seen. Mom called it a celebration. That was the word she used, celebration, like my daughter being 3 weeks old was a reason to gather everyone in her dining room and pretend that Sunday never happened. Marcus didn't want to go. He sat on the edge of the bed that morning and said, "You don't owe them this." I said, "I know." I went anyway because part of me still needed to see if they would say something real. We walked in and Mom took the baby immediately, turned to the room and said, "She's perfect. She has the family nose. Did everyone see that? That's our side completely." Then she looked at me. "You look tired. Are you sleeping?" "You have to sleep when she sleeps. Everyone says that." Then, without waiting for my answer, she turned to Dad. "Richard, did you see her hands? She has your mother's hands exactly." She moved from arm to arm around that table while I sat there watching. Aunt Roberta was already there, sitting at the far end of the table, hands folded. She caught my eye when I walked in. She didn't smile. She just looked at me like she was telling me to stay steady. My chest tightened before I could name why. It happened over the green bean casserole. Mom had made it again, same dish, same table, same flickering light when the AC kicked on, and I remember thinking she had no idea how much that casserole was going to mean by the end of the night. Dad was talking, filling the air the way he always does at family dinners, stories about work, the neighbor's fence, things that don't require anyone to feel anything. And then Aunt Roberta put her hands flat on the table. Just that. Flat on the table, quietly, the way you set something down you've been carrying a long time. The room noticed. Dad stopped mid-sentence. Aunt Roberta looked at Mom and said, "Donna, I've been at your table for 61 years. I need to ask you something in front of the people who love you." Mom smiled the smile she uses when she doesn't know what's coming. Aunt Roberta said, "When your daughter told you she was in labor, what did you think was going to happen if you were wrong and she was right?" Mom opened her mouth. Then, "I don't think this is Roberta. We were trying to stay calm. You don't want a panicking mother panicking her daughter even more." Nobody spoke. We thought Bev was there. We thought she was in good hands. The room stayed silent. Dad put his fork down. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother run out of road. Dad started talking before Mom could find her footing. That was always how it worked between them. She'd lose her balance and he'd rush in to steady the ground before anyone could see her fall. He looked around the table and said, "I think what your mother meant that night was that first time mothers can sometimes, the anxiety alone can." Aunt Roberta said, "Richard." Just his name, nothing else. He stopped. Then he tried again. "I just think we all said things in the moment that," Aunt Roberta said. "Richard, stop." The table went completely quiet. I watched Dad try to locate the version of this story where they were reasonable people who made a small mistake under pressure. I could see him searching for it. It wasn't there anymore. My cousin, Renee, who had been sitting 2 seats down from me without saying a word all evening, reached under the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't look at me. She just held on. Mom finally spoke. She said, "I don't want to do this here." Aunt Roberta said quietly, "I know, but Elena was alone on that driveway, Donna." Nobody answered that. The flickering light came on. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for longer than I could name. We drove home in the dark, Marcus and I, our daughter asleep in her car seat making the small sounds she makes when she's deep under. He didn't ask me how I felt. He just drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding mine. I made my decision somewhere on that drive, not dramatically, not with anger, just quietly, the way you close a door on a room you finished with. I called Mom the next morning. I told her we needed time, real time, not days longer than that. She started to say something and I said, "I was alone on that driveway, Mom. Bev drove me. My daughter was born and you were still at the table." She didn't answer. I said, "I'm not calling to fight. I'm calling because you should know." And I hung up. What changed was simple. I stopped being the person who swallowed things so everyone else could stay comfortable. My daughter is going to grow up watching me decide what I will and won't carry. That is the only thing I know how to give her that matters. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize something true in it, please like this video, subscribe so you never miss one of these, and leave me a comment. Tell me, did I make the right call, yes or no? I used to think the hardest thing was knowing the truth. It isn't. The hardest thing is deciding what to do once you do. I called a cab for myself a long time ago. I just didn't know it yet.